Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Dungeons & Dragons Campaign Mapping. Today, I'm going to be showing you very loosely how to draw a world map. This map will not contain your entire world. We're going to make one continent first. The goal of this episode is to have a gameplay-ready asset that you can use in your campaign. So, let's get started. The first consideration of your map is you'll need to set a scale. And for me, the scale that I tend to use is always 1 inch is 25 miles. Now, it may sound like it's going to be hard to fit a lot of detail into 1 inch squares that are 25 miles across. That's true. But this is our overworld, or our overarching map. And in the next video, when I get around to it, we're going to zoom in to smaller and smaller layers that are divisible by 5. So we're going to drop down and do a number of 5-mile square maps that will show you what is contained within one of these 1 inch square, 25-mile square zones. That's kind of the secret of scale, is if you pick something divisible by a number, you'll be able to zoom in and zoom out as you need to by making more maps. So, having determined your scale, I recommend writing it down on one of the edges of the paper. Mine is actually down below the bottom right here, outside the bounds of the camera. We're using my smartphone camera because my regular camera that I hadn't used in years, USB camera, actually died the moment I plugged it in. It recorded for a good 30 seconds, and then it was kaput. So we're doing this on the phone camera, for better or worse. So now that we have scale, the next thing we need is a grid. And I am just going to take the ruler, make one straight line across the bottom. And if you don't have all of the tools to do this, that's fine. You can get by with just a pencil, paper, and sheer willpower. It's what I did for many years when I was much younger. But it will be helpful to have a straight edge or a ruler, and one of these right-angled square guys could be handy. And of course, pencil, eraser, that kind of thing. Different colored pens or markers or colored pencils might also be useful later, but we'll get to that. Just stick with me and follow along as best you can. So we have that little right-angled piece. I forget what this is called, so I'm just going to call it the right angle thing. Now, along our bottom line here, use the ruler and mark out 1 inch increments along the bottom. This will tell us how much continent we can fit onto our piece of paper. Kind of important. So, I have those marked, and now we take the right angle, we line up the bottom edge with our line, move the perpendicular piece over, and then we're going to go up very, very lightly, because this is not the final thing, right? This is a guideline, which we can extend later. So I'm just going to go down and do all of these. And if they're not perfectly straight, that's okay. You can make another line if you want, or just let it be. Either way. It's in pencil, so totally fine to erase and go again. I had originally planned on a 14 by 14 inch continent for my own game world, but I realized pretty rapidly I don't have a 14 by 14 inch piece of paper. So let's see what we get here. Of course, I could have pre-calculated this by measuring the sheet of paper, but it's fine. So we have our guideline along the bottom, we have our vertical lines. Let's take one of those verticals and extend it all the way up using the ruler. I would grab whichever one looks like it came out the most straight, the most clean. So with that line going up, we can now take the ruler and go ahead and measure out a bunch of 1 inch increments vertically and mark those. There is a way to modify this system to directly use longitude and latitude. I might cover that in a future video on request, but it's kind of overkill for the game unless you're trying to do a very accurate, like a real-world history kind of D&D world, and map very precisely to a sphere that is the size of the Earth. For the purpose of this, I am not concerned yet with the sphericality of the planet. The idea being the players will be on this continent. There may or may not be any other continents. If there aren't yet, and I haven't made them, the main thing is just to not tell the players they exist, and to let everyone know, through in-game chatter amongst NPCs, or by having those NPCs answer player questions, that boats don't go off into the ocean. That's just foolish. No one would do that. Why would you do that? There's nothing out there. You'll just die. Boats only follow the coastline fool, this is the whole world. And if you're pretty firm in telling players that, generally it will work out that way. And if they do go off the edge of the map and they find nothing but water for days, they will naturally lose interest and go back to the mainland. It's also okay to just be like, hey guys, the rest of the world isn't ready yet. I am making this one continent hyper-detailed. There will be travel to other places later, but it's just not ready. If you want me to focus on making that, then over the next few weeks, I will start and we can travel to another place. That's kind of the other thing that I would offer. My group has normally been pretty receptive to, hold on, let me just go build that real quick, especially if it's something they specifically want, like a seafaring-focused campaign. But by default, I tend to design for play on land, because that is, for the most part, what the game is made to do, or at least the editions of D&D that I play, or that I run. I'll play any edition that someone else is going to try and run, but if I am running the game, it is probably going to be in 3.5 or in first edition. Those are the two that I am familiar with, that I enjoy the most, all of that. Okay, so our horizontal lines are almost done. Just touching up these on the far right. I'm not used to having to work around the camera arm, especially since it's ended up on the right-hand side, and I am right-handed. What can you do? You can see on the bottom half the beginning of the grid taking shape, but the top half, remember we didn't extend these lines up all the way. It's now time to do that, and I'll just go ahead and do that using this tool. It is straight enough and long enough for the task. The other thing I'm seeing is there's a sheet of lined paper underneath this sheet of drawing paper. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see it on camera, but I can actually see through the transparency of the art paper. You can see those lines underneath, which honestly is not actually very helpful. It's more throwing me off, making me think I've drawn a line somewhere when I haven't. But as the map grows more detailed and this page fills up with pencil, that will quickly not be an issue. So we are now 11 minutes in. We have a grid. We have our scale in the bottom right, maybe off screen, but it's down here below the pencil. So from here, the only thing left to consider is landmass. And on the note of players that might want to travel by sea, we could include some islands. That way there's maybe something to get them started, or to tempt them into short-term sea travel, and then from there maybe we could expand outward to them going off to another continent, that kind of thing. Or maybe none of that will happen, and the massive mainland I originally planned on will be the main thing. But first, let's see how much total potential land we have to work with here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares down, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 squares across. Normally I would grab my phone to do this calculation, but the phone is busy recording. So 7 by 25 is 175, 9 by 25 is 225. So we have 225 times 175 miles. We have about 40,000 square miles of terrain, technically 39,375 if we were to fill all of this. You may be thinking that's a lot of total mileage, and it is, especially since D&D is normally played in like the 5 to 10 or 15 mile increment when the party is traveling on foot or with like a slow-moving wagon or something going behind the group that would keep them locked to that 10-mile-an-hour speed. Then again, the travel rates and distances change drastically between different versions of D&D, so what appears large to me may be small to you. The secret is you can always, you're the dungeon master, you can always change the travel rates to fit the map. Having walked 10 miles in a day in real life before with no gear, it's a lot. 25 miles, like this map, would be steep, carrying armor, equipment, rations for weeks, and so on, and then coordinating a large march. But anyway, that stuff aside, we're here to make a map today. If there's a subject you'd like to hear me talk about that is D&D, Dungeons & Dragons related, let me know in the comments, and I'll make another video about that later. But our main goal here is just to fill in the landmass and to somewhat respect the boundaries of the grid. Like, I wouldn't want to draw, say, a small circle right here that is across all 4 of these squares, because each of these squares we're going to zoom in on and have the square blow up and be its own map on its own grid later. So there is a bit of gamification that may need to go on to make things neatly fit, and that's totally fine. Under the hood, video games are made of pixels. Pixels are squares, this is no different. And when I draw a small shape like this, remember it's about halfway across the square, I've just drawn an island 12 miles across. That could be all we need for the first 5 or 10 sessions. You plop a village down on there, maybe a couple little like ancient tombs, maybe a little like smuggler's port on the far side across from the village, and that right there is its own little ecosystem. And so with every square we fill in, kind of think like that. Who's there? What are they doing? And what would the players run into in that area? Of course, you don't have to have a full plan right away. And I talk about self-containing within the borders, but now I do want to have just like a big continent shape. And I don't have a plan when I draw this, I just kind of fit it in, however, and then we'll adjust later. It is just going to be an ugly, big, lumpy thing. So although I have art skills, they don't really apply here. We're not drawing people-shaped figures. Okay, so we've drawn out our line, checking the camera to make sure that that's kind of visible for you all. Okay, so there are 2 spots here where I'm going to erase, because I kind of went slightly into a grid area, and I don't want to make a zoomed-in map that just contains a single 4-mile square. Not right now. So I'm just going to change the curvature of the coast to kind of fix that. And now we have that basic shape. Now, this landmass is going to be somewhere in the world, right? North to south. We kind of have to think ahead about, is this the frozen north? Is this like a foggy, sort of temperate English isle? Is this a giant, mostly like desert sandbar or savanna or whatever, that kind of thing? And I think I would like it to be kind of arid, kind of sandy, a bit of desert, a lot of rock, probably. Because if it were all sand, it might wash away. Not really a geographer. I just make things for gameplay. So along this, I want to kind of note, and I'm just going to go in and gently draw wherever the land curves outward a bit. I'm going to draw these curving lines through it, especially over here where this almost, the shape on the right almost wants to bubble out and be a peninsula. I'm going to cut across that because those areas are very likely to be at sea level, or I suppose to be massive rocky, cliffs that are very high up. Depends on how the terrain curves. But just leaving those lines there for me for later. And I did say I wanted islands. We put in 1 island, but I did leave some space. So in the bottom right, I'll take over one of these little squares, and I'm just going to draw 3 kind of oval-shaped little islands there. Maybe another one in the grid section above it that is a bit bigger, single blob. And then the upper left here, kind of almost off of where the camera is. Oh no, we're definitely off camera there. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to draw like 1, 2, very symmetrical. Maybe there is something there. Maybe a bridge across or a sandbar connecting them. Don't know. We can decide on that later. And then I'll do a couple more sort of large islands there, something maybe crescent-shaped. And of course, the great thing about a map is I could have just sat down and drawn, just this 1 island and added to this over the weeks that the campaign goes on for. The map could grow and develop. Again, telling your players that this is in development. The important thing is to not, if you change something that's already on your map or in your world, like you move the position of Paris, France, after starting the players there. Your players will, they're your friends. They're probably going to go, oh yeah, okay, Ducky, got it. Paris is 200 miles to the east now, and that's where we are. But whenever you do that publicly, it erodes trust and gives your players a reason to not focus or be as interested in the topology of your world. So once I put down an island like this and tell the players there's a 5-mile across island there covered in trees, it needs to be there forevermore, covered in trees, unless something cataclysmic happens that would change it. So it's one thing to say, I am going to fill in this space later. It's another thing to say, I am changing everything in this space. You can get away with changes in-universe by having something plausible but convincing happen, like a volcanic eruption or other similar massive weather events, like a monsoon. But if you do that every week, again, you will fatigue out your players and they'll just go, oh, what's the catastrophe this week? So save those kinds of map-changing events if you need to pull them out of your pocket for like once a year. But we now have a map to fill in. I know that I want kind of this corner in the bottom left here to be a desert. Now, Editor Ducky may need to zoom in to show what I'm doing here. If this were purely a showcase and not something I'd want to change later, I might be doing this in pen. But I've just drawn a dotted line around the coast, which visually gives the implication that there are waves coming up onto the coastline. And I normally do that to indicate that there's going to be sand there. So it's both going to be at sea level and sandy. This might be a good spot for there to be a port. Maybe at this stage I would put down just a dot, a big gray dot like that, to indicate that there might be a port town or a village of some kind there. Having some idea of how populated you want your continent or your island or what have you to be is also probably a good idea at the start. I didn't think of that. I instead kind of had an idea of how much wilderness I wanted. So for me, about every 2 squares, or a minimum like 1 square apart, is how far apart I would separate settlements. Because I want there to be these vast patches of nothing into which we can insert other things later. Bandit camps, oases, other strange events, wandering nomads. Who knows what will be in those empty spaces? I won't figure that out until I zoom in later. On a broad, overarching map like this, all I want is the major towns, whatever they may be, so anything over population like 5k, and the major terrain features. Like, for example, say on this island in the bottom right, there is a mountain. So I would draw just a little triangle to represent that. Maybe down in the bottom right, let me grab this little guy here again. So we have a few things to add to our map key. We know that a dot, town, and we know that a triangle marker, about like this, is a mountain. And this is stuff that you either should put on your map if it's something you're going to hand out to players, or you should be able to have these little bits of key memorized, standardized, and be able to tell your players consistently, oh yes, that's a mountain range. That's the town of Bobford or what have you. But this larger map is very much just a lay of the land thing to allow you to zoom in and figure out what goes on a more micro scale. And of course, to give the party an idea as well of the scope of the area they're in and what's going on. This square here, I've filled in with mountains. We'll come back to how mountainous that is later, but just I know by looking at this, okay, that's a very mountainous square. There's no civilization there. Noted. And then we move on. Filling in a map like this is a fairly, maybe not straightforward process, but fairly simplistic process. Over here on the right, where I said we were going to be very much at sea level, maybe even below in some places, I'm going to draw these horizontal lines with little lines under or over them. So that's a new symbol. So we're going to draw that on our little key here as well. We have a line with some lines over it. And we're going to note that that is a marsh. Or if we're going to theme this area as super sandy, maybe that's an area where quicksand is likely. It could, of course, still have like patches of scrub grass and stuff, but it's going to be the kind of terrain where you walk over it and you can see either the water or like the thick pools of wet silt that would be there. It's an area that might also like get covered up by the tide. It might erode over time, more geological time than real time. Like the players, when they arrive, it'll, not disappear, not very quickly. Then again, that's one of those potentials for change where 6 IRL months into the campaign, you can be like, hey, that place you guys were at where you found that tomb, it's all flooded now. Or in reverse, if there's an area in there that's flooded, you have someone mention there is a flooded tomb, you can say like, hey, something has gone wrong with the tides. The tide pulls out and one guy found over there that the tomb is dry for like 6 hours a day. Bit of news. And so terrain like that feeds back into the potential for adventure and situations for your players to get into. This is something that I strongly recommend thinking about as you fill in your little doodles here. But because we're basically on a giant island, very large island, it's very likely that civilization would be built around the edges as much as possible. Because traveling by boat would, of course, be far more convenient than walking across sand and rocky faces and marshes and mountains and that kind of thing. Especially if I keep going with what I did here in this square with the mountains. If I keep adding mountains, that is going to tell us that there's a big barrier in the middle, which will also probably force foot traffic to circulate, or in rare cases, maybe they will go through. Maybe this here is a mountain pass in the middle, which brings us to our next map marker, which is the double line for a road. This is distinct from the symbol for a bridge that I use, which is more shaped like this. I don't think we're going to be doing or having terribly large rivers here, so I'm not going to draw any rivers. Just note, if you're thinking of drawing a river, that rivers, like all water, flow from a high place, and they flow to a low place. And since we've drawn the whole outline of a continent, obviously your rivers are probably going to flow naturally out toward the ocean. And if your river has a bend in it, then it is turning to avoid a high place. It's following the lowlands. So when you draw your rivers, let me get another sticky note. So when you go in, say, we have our mountain here, snowy peak. We have our water here and land. So when you draw a river, if it goes straight, that implies that all the land around it is relatively flat and low. And if you want to introduce another highland, such as with this hill shape, it should be beyond the river. Now, if your river bends like this, think, why did it bend? Either the ground is very low here, there's something obscuring it. It's entirely possible that it's going around another mountain. So just things to consider. And then when we look at this, the straightest line is, of course, here. Why didn't it go around to the right-hand side? Why did it go left? Presumably because it followed the course of least resistance, and this area on the left is lower than whatever is on the right. And you don't have to represent that on your high-level map, your zoomed-out map, but it might be good to consider that maybe there's hills here. Or maybe there aren't. Maybe the difference in terrain is not super noticeable at this level of zoom. Maybe it's only like 10, 20 feet. Who knows? Again, I'm not a geographer. This is just kind of basic stuff that was drilled into me by other people who taught me how to do this. So we've established that we're pretty coastal in terms of civilization. Let's go ahead and put down those dots, remembering that what I wanted was to not have large towns that are closer than 25 miles to each other. And whenever I place a town dot, I'm basically looking for where the curve of the continent comes inward, because that's going to be a better spot to put a harbor generally. And we'll figure out names and factions and allegiances for these towns and all of that at a later time. I might not even put names down on this map, and instead save that feature for the zoomed-in maps. The thing to think about is who controls this land, and I really haven't gotten that far yet, but it's possible that incoming travelers might be dropped off at a single town, just like in the game of Morrowind, everyone goes through Seyda-Neen, right? Which serves both as a small tutorial and a starting point, but also in lore, that's just where people have to pass through, it seems, to then go on to the continent. So whether you designate that as a town, or you make it a village later, or you could even put it out on one of the islands and have it be a thing where you have to go in, get your documents, and then they put you on a separate boat that takes you to the nearest actual port on the mainland. Depends on how secure this place is. On the flip side, maybe these 6 dots are all city-states, each with their own policies on letting people in. Maybe they're all at war. We don't know yet. That is something that I'm going to have to think about as I sit down to write additional documents that cover each area and who's in them and that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm looking at the map and going like, I actually don't think I need anything else on this right now. It's very easy to add terrain features. It's very hard to take them away, especially once I start filling this in with pen and with color. Can't really erase that too easily. And we are at about 30 minutes for this recording, so I think I'm going to stop here. This is how it's made. This is going to be a continent for my future game world, and I have a lot to think about, as you may have intuited. But if you have any Dungeons & Dragons questions, or questions about world building, drawing maps, any of that, let me know down in the comments, and I will consider that stuff for a future video. We may revisit this map in a later video, because it is not done yet. There's a lot that I need to process before moving forward to another video. But definitely we'll look at this map again, and I would like to zoom in on one of these segments and get that detailed enough that I could actually start a campaign there in one of these towns or on one of the islands. Just give it enough, like I talked about earlier, give it enough that the players will have stuff to do for a few sessions, which then buys me time to prepare the area around them and kind of listen to what they're talking about doing. Like if they're talking about, they're on the island and they're talking about, oh, we want to go up to, this town way up here. We hear they have the best prices. Then I may forego doing much with this part of the coastline and just go straight up to this square, detail that town. It pays to prepare your prep for your next session based on what you think your players are going to do. Of course, start of next session, if they decide they don't want to go here and they instead want to go down here, well, then it's time to scramble and figure something out. So the more of this I have detailed, the more prepared I'll be for the fickle whims of whatever they want to do. And anything they come up with that I haven't yet covered for, hopefully I can stay ahead. It's kind of a constant race. That's why I spend, usually when making these sorts of campaign things, I spend so many hours tinkering with the map, and writing up documents about who's where and towns and factions and stuff. And 95% of it or more goes unused. That's okay, because I really enjoy sitting down and doing this creative, sort of imaginative process, even if the result is just sort of squiggles on a grid. Anyway, I think that's all for now, and I hope you've enjoyed. I will see you all in the next video. I don't know when that will be, as this is my second channel and not my main channel, so I won't be super focused on content here, but I will be back eventually. So, if you want to get hold of me, leave a comment, even if this video is months or years old. There's a chance, right? Anyway, bye-bye for now. Have a wonderful day.